The wrong Jamal. My name is Daryl Whitaker. I'm an accountant, a rule follower, and the kind of man who considers a wild night to be trying pineapple on pizza. I live in a detached house on Maple Street, take pride in my moderately maintained lawn, and stay out of trouble. So when a certified letter arrived addressed to me, I figured it was something trivial. Maybe a birthday card from my Aunt Bernice who still thinks I collect stamps. I don't, Aunt Bernice. But when I opened it, I didn't find a card or a Billy found a court summons. The document, written in that stiff serif font that tries too hard to intimidate, declared that I was being sued by the Pleasant Acres Homeowners Association for unpaid HOA fines. My first reaction was laughter. Pleasant Acres? I had never even heard of the place. I didn't live in any HOA community, and I sure as hell didn't know anyone for lawn maintenance violations. My second reaction was confusion. How could this be? I reread the address. It was mine. No mistake there. The idea that someone in a neighborhood I had never set foot in was dragging me to court for unpaid fines felt like a twisted sitcom plot. But as the absurdity settled into my bones, my accountant brain kicked in. Someone was wasting my time, and I don't like people who waste my time. I decided to do some investigating before calling a lawyer. A quick Google search led me to the Pleasant Acres website. It was a gated community about 20 minutes from pristine lawns, pastel mailboxes, and the kind of homogeneity that screamed, "We all drive beige SUVs." There were pictures of their board, and let's just say they weren't winning any diversity awards. That's when my gut stirred. I've learned to trust my gut. This wasn't just an error. It smelled like something deeper. And when injustice rears its head, even if it starts with something as mundane as lawn citations, I pay attention. So I drove to Pleasant Acres. The community was just as sterile as it looked online. As I pulled up to the gate, a woman emerged from the booth. She had platinum blonde hair styled in a gravity-defying helmet and a frown deep enough to cut glass. "Can I help you?" she asked, squinting like my presence alone was an offense. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, keeping it civil. "I received a summons about unpaid HOA fines, but I don't live here. My name is Daryl Whitaker. I live on Maple Street." Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it got tighter. She tapped at her keypad like a falcon pecking its prey. "We do have a Daryl Whitaker in our records," she said, lips pursed. "Several months behind in dues. Multiple violations for lawn neglect." That's when I nearly laughed again. My lawn may not be country club perfect, but it's not a jungle. I mow. I edge. I water sometimes. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "I think there's been a mix-up. I've never lived here. I don't belong to this HOA. "I'm Brenda Kingsley," she replied, "president of the Pleasant Acres Homeowners Association. And we do not make mistakes. If you're in our system, you're responsible." There it was. The tone, the condescension, the way her eyes roamed my face like I was an intruder. It was more than a clerical error. It was personal. "Can we just double-check the address?" I asked, restraining my irritation. With an exasperated sigh, she shoved a faded form at me. As I scribbled down my address, I noticed her watching Minute with curiosity, but with disdain. And I knew this wasn't about lawn care. This was about race. Back home, I started digging. Using the association's own website, thank you, Internet, I combed through their bylaws, violation records, and resident directory. And then I found it. There was another Daryl Whitaker. This one lived at 14 Oakwood Lane. Middle initial T. I don't have a middle name, let alone a T. And based on his public Facebook photos, God bless the oversharer, clearly had a different relationship with landscaping. His lawn looked like an overgrown wildlife preserve. I call my friend Dion. She's not just any attorney, she's the kind of brilliant that makes judges take notes. Dion and I had worked together before. She was the perfect person to call. "Dion," I said, "I think I'm being targeted by an HOA that confused me with another black guy who happens to have the same name." She didn't hesitate. "That's not just mistaken identity, Daryl. That's targeted harassment. Send me everything, the summons, emails, anything you've got. And start a paper trail. Document every interaction." She was right. This wasn't about lawn care. It was about principle. I wasn't going to roll over for someone who thought my skin color was enough reason to drag me to court. I spent the next week gathering proof utility bills, property tax documents, and even time-stamped photos of my house and lawn. Dion built our case like an artist with a chisel, chipping away at the ridiculous claims one by one. When the court date arrived, I walked in with my head high and evidence in hand. On the other side of the courtroom sat Brenda Kingsley, her expression smug and confident. Beside her was a lawyer who looked like he'd been living on caffeine and regret. The judge, a steely-eyed woman named Judge Elkins, called the case. Brenda's lawyer launched into a dramatic monologue about civic duty, property standards, and the sanctity of HOA regulations. He flashed photos of the jungle lawn belonging to Daryl T. Whitaker, trying to imply they were mine. Then Dion rose. With surgical calm, she presented my address, identity, and proof. My client, she said, has no affiliation with Pleasant Acres. This is a case of mistaken identity and one that could have been avoided with the most basic of due diligence. But instead of checking facts, the Pleasant Acres HOA pursued legal action based on name alone. My client deserves better. It was my turn. I stood up, took a breath, and spoke from the heart. I told the court how I was treated the moment I arrived at that gate. How Brenda looked through me. How she saw a name and a skin tone and decided I must be guilty. I work long hours, I pay my taxes, and I take care of my home, I said. What I don't do is tolerate being harassed because of someone else's assumptions. The judge didn't need long. Case dismissed, she said firmly. And I recommend that Pleasant Acres reviews its policies immediately. As I turned to leave, I caught Brenda storming out. I couldn't resist. MS. Kingsley, I said, maybe next time, try facts over fear. You might save yourself some embarrassment. She didn't respond. Just muttered something about activist judges before disappearing down the hallway. A few weeks later, Dion called me again. Her voice was practically singing. You're going to love this, she said. Turns out your case got people talking. A few residents at Pleasant Acres started digging into Brenda's HOA leadership. They found skeletons. Lots of them. Unapproved expenditures. Inflated invoices. Trips charged to the HOA account. It wasn't just garden variety mismanagement, it was embezzlement. The residents held a special vote. Brenda was ousted. Investigations were opened. And the biggest twist? Daryl T. Whitaker, the guy with the wild lawn? He ran for HOA president. And he won. By a landslide. Apparently, people had had enough of judgmental leadership and wanted someone real. So that's how it ended. A simple summons turned into a community reckoning. A man was mistaken for another because of his name and the color of his skin, but instead of backing down, he stood his ground. And in doing so, he helped expose something much bigger. There's a lesson in that. Don't mess with the quiet ones. Don't assume because someone looks a certain way that you know who they are. And if you're ever in doubt, check the damn address. Sometimes justice doesn't just knock. Sometimes it brings backup. And sometimes it plants wildflowers on the front lawn just to remind the world that beauty doesn't always come in a straight line.